Yes, they are.
Oh. Huh. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let me check the camera too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm getting it. Yeah, it's good. It's pretty good. Yeah. Uh, nothing. Okay. So shut this. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. Three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Good. Mike. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. And then the other one, 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming early in the morning. We have a packed program, and I'm delighted to have people coming from all over the places, from industry as well as our own people. So to give us welcome, introduce Karen Plott. She is the Executive Vice President for Research and Partnership. And before that, she was the Dean of Agriculture, and before that, she was the Associate Dean for Research, and she was one of the key people to help connect Berk centers, connect what we are doing in digital agriculture. Please.
Thanks, Ollie. Oh, now it sounds like the microphone's on. You have to hold it closer. It's great to be here today, and as Ollie said, because I was around when I think your first SMART consortium meeting, and where we were looking at what kind of industry partners we can put together for this initiative. So really excited to be here today. I was talking to some of you and saying, and the unfortunate part is I can't stay. I only get to say hello and goodbye all in the next couple minutes. But I just want to talk a little bit about Purdue. And, you know, we provide solutions really to and with the safe and secure nation. That's one of our goals. And when you look at that, that's across many areas. And actually, I'll tell you a story that might be more interesting. So I was Dean of Agriculture until January, and you know, we're about feeding the people and global food security and all of those things. And then I entered my new world and went to a meeting, and they said, are you ready? Kill all the people and take all their toys. So I went from, I feed everyone, to killing people. And I'm like, what is this about? It's about securing the nation, the world. It's about, you really need all of these elements when you think about it to make a secure future. So you have the people that are doing bad things. We need that part of what we do. That's the national security, which Purdue is very proud of what we do in national security. At the same time, you need to feed the people. You need economic prosperity. You need to build infrastructure and technology that allows us to move forward. And when you look at the SMART consortium, that's actually what you're about, is building all these technologies for various industries to continue to move forward to provide a safe and secure world. And that's really what we need. Our nation and the world needs to be where each of us can be comfortable living, working, and playing, and in an environment that is safe. So that's really, as you look at the bigger picture, what's exciting about this initiative. There aren't that many initiatives that span so many of these areas that bring people together from these different areas to use IoT technologies and this smart manufacturing to make a difference in the world. And this group right here can do it. And that's the exciting thing. And you're going to get a chance to look at that today and see some of the various things that we can do. One of the exciting things, and the reason why years ago I got involved in the SMART consortium, is we have to work together. We have to work across industries. That's the advantage you have in this consortium. The reason Ollie and I had that talk, what was it, 2015, 16? 15, was because we knew that the power of us working together, the power of us working across industry, academics, is really important and can move some things forward that sometimes you don't think about when you're in your own discipline. So that's what's exciting, I think, about today. One of the things Purdue is doing is trying to build on this legacy. So we have a new initiative called Purdue Computes. It's got a couple different pieces in it that are exciting for the future. One is 75 new faculty in the area of computer science and those types of things. And then another piece that we affectionately call IPI, the Institute for Physical AI. And that is really, we talk about not just ChatGPT, where you're using it for writing examples and things like that, but actually using some of these new technologies to make a difference in what we call we make, we move, we grow things. So bringing artificial intelligence into those items, the physical items, so from atoms to bytes. So that's an exciting initiative to move forward. We have a committee working on it. It will be announced really in the fall, but it's an exciting place where Purdue can really make a difference. So that's one of the things we're moving forward. The last piece of that is really the focus on semiconductors. We have a number of people here who work in that area and continuing to move that forward. And as you know, Burke is getting a large remodeling, $50 million remodeling and replacement of equipment in Burke in order to really move forward for the next generation of semiconductors. That also includes a educational component. It's really important, and you hear over and over again, workforce development. So for those graduate students who are in the room, you've got a bright future in front of you, lots of opportunities to move forward. And as you look at that, this kind of symposium is really important for you, the graduate students, as well as everyone else. But for the graduate students, I think one of the things that this should spur is innovation, because you can look at what other people are doing, spend time talking to people that you don't know, learning about the kinds of things they do, because that's really, in your next generation, as you continue to move forward in your field, we need your innovation, and your innovation comes from talking to people outside your field, bringing that into different fields and really making a difference for the future. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ollie. I just want to say thank you to our industry partners for coming today. Good to see some people online. I don't see you, but I assume you're there and learning. And hopefully take advantage of today, and good luck with the rest of the consortium.
Thank you very much, Karen. So for us to go through the overview, what we have is a PAC program. I give a very brief overview of what SMART is about. Mustafa Hussain will talk about some of the new initiatives we are doing in this area of connecting to the CHIPS Act. We start by applications, and we identify 3 areas. We give some presentations. We look forward to hear from industry. Then we go to some common technologies, again, areas we think are the building blocks. But we again look forward to see how we could partner with industry to complement what we are doing. And the next one at 10 o'clock, we will discuss about what we are doing in the area of AI in manufacturing. It turns out when you do hardware development, with the recent advances in AI, there is much more flexibility and opportunity, and that's what we want to follow. And at 10:30, we will have student lightning talks. You will have an opportunity to hear very brief overview of their posters, and then visit the posters and demonstrations 11:30 to 1:30. In the afternoon, we have the closed session with industry. Again, we look forward to hear your feedback during the whole day. I guess this is not my slides. If I can go to my slides. Oops. So again, very quickly, what we have here is SMART Consortium started in 2016, 7 years ago, because in the area of IoT, for wearables, disposable, biodegradable type of devices, sensors, there is a manufacturing gap. There is no scale up for non-silicon. So that's what we have focused on. But of course, you need to bring data to the cloud. You need to integrate hybrid ICs. You need to communicate. So we need to have the full solution. That was the first ingredient. The second one is there is a lot of synergies when you bring industries from ag, food, healthcare, pharmaceutical, infrastructure. Even though they are very different, some of the sensings are quite similar. And really, the consortium just supports student work. One of the reasons you do a consortium is to do pre-competitive work. The idea is, of course, there is a lot of research fundamental that is funded by federal government. Industry does a lot of development. And the gap can be shortened if industry is willing to work together in this pre-competitive research. Over the years, we have tested some new ideas and platforms, and in quite a few of these projects, we have also have IP protected research with industry. We realize at some point you need to develop a product, and again, Purdue is very flexible. We have been able to do the transition for quite a few of the projects. Of course, what brings it together are people. We have more than 20 faculty and another 20, 25 students. They come all the way from manufacturing, materials, printing, quality control, to devices, electronics, data analytics, and even education workforce. And you will hear more about it later today. So I think of course, we will have an opportunity to visit the facilities. I don't want to belabor on that. You are here, so it's a good opportunity to see that. My last slide, what we anticipate from our industry partners. Again, the feedback on specific systems, IoT systems, data analytics, that could be useful for your applications. The more you can work with our students, opportunities to collaborate and internship is good. And advice about commercialization, even joint proposals working with federal government. And we are, part of the reason we did this is we wanted to do pilots. We can do thousands of samples. It's not one or two samples to write a paper. And other advantage would be to work among the industry partners because the research areas are very complementary. So with that, I will take it to Mustafa, who will discuss about our future initiatives.
Thank you, Ali. Good morning, everyone. 2009, before I joined academia, I was program manager of Sematech. So at that point, America's largest semiconductor research consortium. The reason I moved to academia is the daily interaction, that opportunity that I would have with the students, because they're youth and they bring tons of ideas. So what we are trying to do, as you will see, that how we can actually take those ideas and can bring it to much more closer to you. And from that perspective, as you might know, that to bring electronics manufacturing back to the USA, last year, there is a bipartisan law has been enacted, which is called the CHIPS and Science Act. And here is a reason behind that. 85% of the innovations in semiconductor electronics take place in the USA, but only 13% or less of those electronics are being manufactured in the USA. So we basically have a huge disparity. And if I just go and look forward to the packaging, we only do 2%, okay? So those activities. So we basically need to bolster our leadership in semiconductors so that, like, there is a $52 billion that the government has appropriated for these activities. So you can see that approximately 40% are going to be spent directly for the semiconductor industries. And the definition can be pretty broad. And then there is approximately 13%, which is going to be for more, 75%, is for the industries. And then approximately 24%, you can say, is going to be for more concerted R&D effort, like focus toward manufacturing, like packaging, National Semiconductor Technology Center, such and such. 1% is coming back, and that's for workforce development. Means we do have a talent gap of 50,000 that we need in the next 5 years. It may sound like a completely bold and ambitious goal, but it seems like that if we do our math correctly, if we all work together, then it is entirely possible to hit or get closer to that number. So these incentives will secure domestic supply, will create tens of thousands of good-paying union construction jobs and thousands more highly skilled manufacturing jobs. And it will catalyze hundreds of billions more in private investment. As an example, if you go and check, then at this point there is $250 billion different semiconductor industries they have pledged to basically spend toward this program. Okay? So Purdue actually has pledged intellectually, financially, and logistically. And you are going to see the first one is a recent announcement last month. It's a $100 million investment, as our Executive Vice President Research, she was suggesting. We have the country's first, and at this point, the only dedicated semiconductor degree program. We do have also the Purdue Online 2.0, because to scale up all these, we have included the Purdue Online, which is ranked #1. We do have the Nano Hub. We do also have the Virtual Fab Lab. So we are basically going all out. And then there is the research hubs and Purdue Advanced Research Institute. That's also is being talked about. There is 60 plus faculty, 150 plus courses, and we are targeting to train 1,000 trainees per year. And high schoolers, college students, veterans, and these are not just the promise. We have already started. Those programs are already running. 30 plus semiconductor industries are actually the board members. It's called the Semiconductor Degree Leadership Board. Skywater, they have committed to build a fab here, which is going to worth $2 billion. 700 manufacturing jobs will be created. MediaTek is establishing one of their sites here. And obviously the sustainability and cybersecurity, where we have put our pledge, the computing, physical AI, you heard about that, and then obviously the diversity, equity, and inclusion are going to be promoted significantly. So having said that, as you can see, so one of the things, how the Purdue Smart is going to respond. So here's the thing, that what happens with the CHIPS money when the chips are being created? So there is a directive from the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology that neurological or the brain-related research and devices, implantable and ingestible electronics, you are going to hear from Hugh and here Lee, they are going to talk about that, interfacing semiconductors, biology for specific sensing functions. Jacqueline, there is Rahim, they are going to talk about all these kind of things, and next generation wearable biosensors and actuators where there will be the focus. So having said that, Purdue Smart strategies from our side, farm to fork, low cost environmentally responsive sensors, field testing and verifications, point of care diagnostics, wearable and implantable, and technology translation. We basically are working to create two things, and you will be hearing about that, or you can visit the posters. Miko is going to talk, and Saeed Mohammadi also, that the common platform technology, think about Raspberry Pi, how that enabled thousands of innovations. And think about the baseline, that thousands of devices, the same devices have been produced, 50 at least in one batch, and we do have the data which actually says every single data point that you need and to bring your confidence on these kind of baselines. The startups will be able to take advantage of that. You have a new material processes or anything like that, bring it, and we will be most probably do the apple-to-apple comparison. So having said that, that's our plan and new initiatives from Purdue Smart perspective. Okay, thank you so much.
Oh, you should correct. We can do that. Meanwhile, I guess the next session is about application areas. And we have 3 main application areas. I guess there is a glitch. We start with the digital ag first one. So Rahim, you can come here. It's good to have. By the way, you know, there are chairs on this side. You don't have to be on the back. And if we could do it so that people can go around. Yeah, visitors should come. I think we just go there and it says.
Yeah, but if I swap, I don't know what you see. Now you're seeing, right?
No, there is a double clicking. There, okay, but here is the problem.
Yeah, right. Let me try again.
Yeah, please.
Okay, now I'm seeing exactly what's on the screen right now.
But this,
Yeah, that
yeah.
will work. Yeah, hold on.
But you cheat there, but here in the room.
Yeah, we want to duplicate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it? Yep, Mac is different than the PC, so there you go. Bingo. All right, we should be good now. We good?
The only thing is that we need to do it for another presentation. Let's hope that works. Does that? Yeah, there was a way we did it before. You have videos, correct? You cannot do PDF. Slideshow. Where is the one? Presenters view. No.
So yeah, just take your mouse over the slideshow at the top.
If I can find this. We will figure it out. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Rahim Rahimi. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Materials Engineering. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the technologies that we have to address these areas that we mentioned about, basically addressing the food challenge and production that we need. So as Karen mentioned this morning, we have to kind of increase the food production to meet the demand that we have by 2050. We actually have to double the food production. So in order to kind of meet that demand, we have to increase the food production from the farm all the way to getting it to the table for the consumer. So in general, from farm to fork, we have to kind of increase the production. But as you can see over here, it's not as simple as just like putting seeds over there, adding fertilizers. One of the main problems that we have limited kind of lands and farms. So they're trying to kind of increase the production by adding more fertilizer, better kind of managing the field. But that also has its own kind of trade-off right now. So about like 40% of the fertilizers that are added to the field is not actually consumed, and it actually goes into the basic water supply system, and that is causing that kind of environmental impact. Another kind of key challenge that we have is in terms of the food that is actually produced. A great portion of it actually going to waste because of basically throughout the supply chain, we have mismanagement, we have basically improper kind of packages. So about like 30% of that food is actually going to waste. So there's a lot of effort that has to be done in terms of better kind of managing this, right? So how can we add, for example, sensors or technologies throughout this entire supply chain to address these kind of challenges, better manage basically the fertilizer that we have to add, or at the same time better kind of manage the packages, right? So how can we add sensors to monitor where this basically the loss is going? How can we actually better manage basically the food that is going throughout the supply chain instead of just relying on expiration dates or just looking at the basically the food. So in general, if we look at agricultural farms, one of the key things that we have in any kind of agricultural kind of field, everything's not uniform. We have a very high level of heterogeneity throughout the entire farm. So some sections, just within a few meters, you can see a lot of difference in terms of the micronutrients that exist, the moisture, and all those kind of parameters. So there's a high level of heterogeneity in terms of the level of fertilizer, the level of basically nutrients that has to be added into the field. So you really need like sensors that could be easily distributed in high levels with good level of accuracy throughout the entire field itself. Same thing with the food supply chain. So we have a great level of heterogeneity in terms of the food itself, right? So we have food produced that has to actually be gone into the supermarkets to the consumer within a few weeks. Some of them actually can last for several years, for example, grains. So you have a great level of heterogeneity in terms of the lifetime, basically, of the produce, as well as the type that exists, right? So the types of sensors that you need, for example, temperature, moisture, basically, integrity. So there's a high level of heterogeneity in terms of the sensors types that you need over there. So in general, this is the idea that we have, and basically based on the efforts that we're actually doing in the Smart Film Consortium, is actually to develop technologies and sensors that you can actually distribute in high levels throughout the basic agricultural field or the food kind of supply chain. And in order to kind of meet that demand, you have to have sensors that are dirt cheap, right? So in the order of a few kind of cents, you could actually integrate into the package or deploy them into the agricultural kind of field. This is the idea that we have. So the sensors has to be very low cost, right? So in the order of a few cents, they shouldn't have electronics in them. So they should be something simple that you could actually put into the field and wirelessly and remotely interrogate that information. So this is the idea. So typically we're in a team that we actually work in combination with material science and electrical engineering. So the idea is that we have a tag or an antenna that could be into the field, and they actually respond to that, the environmental kind of factor, for example, moisture, temperature, or those kind of parameters. And through an interrogating antenna, you can actually read that information, tell if the environment has changed or not. This is a very powerful kind of tool, so your sensors are going to be very cheap, but at the same time, your reader could be more expensive. But that's not a problem because a lot of these cases, you can have a one-time investment in terms of the reader technology that you have, like a robot that could go into the supermarket nowadays, can actually monitor what's going on inside the packages. Or it could actually be on a combine that actually, as it moves on the field, it could interrogate the information from the sensors that are in the field and actually administer the required input at the site. So the question is then how can we actually achieve these kind of goals? As I mentioned, you have to kind of produce these at scale. So our kind of vision is using the facility and the techniques that we have in the Smart Film Consortium to actually produce these at very low cost and a scalable kind of manner. And basically, this is the process that we're actually investigating. You'll have a demo this afternoon about the process and the technology that we have. In general, in order to manufacture some types of sensors like this, in this category that I mentioned, you have 3 routes. You could do the conventional clean room processes, right? So lithography, etching, you get very powerful kind of tools and sensors and designs. But at the same time, you have that kind of downside that these take time, right? So you have several kind of steps in order to manufacture these kind of types of devices. You have the additive manufacturing process. You'll also see a demo this afternoon. The nice thing about this process, you reduce the number of steps, but at the same time, it requires development of the ink, drying, sintering, and those kind of challenges. One of the processes that we're kind of investigating and using this as a tool that you can actually produce these in scale with a significant lower number of steps is the laser processing approach. As you can see over here is a subtractive approach, so you have like a film that has a metallized film on top of it, and using the laser, you could etch away the pattern and create the desired antenna and sensors that you want. So you can see it's a significantly lower number of steps, and you can make these at basically faster kind of scale. So what we're kind of investigating is actually using technology that already exists in the industry, like basically roll-through kind of production. One of the nice things about this kind of process that we're looking into and laser processing is actually you can use conventional metallized kind of films and plastics. So metallized aluminum, paper, these are common commodities that are used for packaging industry. So what we're doing, we're taking this to the next level, actually etching away the pattern and the metallized film to create the desired kind of antennas and sensors. So you might say that this process could be time-consuming because it's a slow process, but I can reassure you, you're going to see a demo this afternoon. The process is pretty fast, right? So within just a few seconds, you can actually pattern and create the desired pattern that you want in the antenna. So Nick has prepared a nice set of sensors using this approach. These are examples of metallized kind of plastics and PETs that we actually create antennas using this process. You could etch away the pattern, creating the metallized trays. And at the end, you could actually use like a 2-step laser process, etch away the metallized layer, and then use another laser to actually die cut the design, right? So die cut the sensor and take it out of the pattern. So using this kind of approach over the past few years, my lab has been investigating different kind of techniques and technologies. So we're looking into different kind of groups and categories. As I mentioned, in terms of the agricultural field, we've developed sensors that you can actually distribute into the field and monitor, for example, moisture. We're looking at microbial activity. Another key important area that I mentioned is actually the food packaging area. So we're looking at food spoilage, moisture levels inside the package using these technologies, right? So a simple example, you could use the antennas to measure moisture, but you could take this to the next level. For example, functionalizing them with polymers, for example, pH responsive or basically microbial responsive polymers. So by simply coating the antenna with that functional material, you can actually detect if that material or chemical is present in that environment. Another key important area that we're also looking at the healthcare sector. So you can actually make these sensors that are cheap, they're cheap, and put it inside, for example, diapers. You could put it inside wound dressings to actually remotely interrogate that information. So because those dressings also need to actually be very low cost. So that being said, you're going to see also another kind of presentation coming up. Professor Jackman is going to talk about the other kind of facilities and equipment that we have in terms of, we mentioned about the antennas, the design that we have, but we can take this to the next level, functionalize them with different kind of polymers and active coating to make this sensitive to the desired kind of type of technology or sensor or application that you have in mind. So that being said, we see this as a very powerful kind of tool in terms of areas and applications that they could address. And we'll be happy to answer any kind of further questions that you might have for the applications or areas that you might be interested in. That being said, I want to thank all the efforts. Again, this is all about people. So they're the people that actually make these things happen. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Rahim. You know, for the industry people, one thing is very helpful is to get your feedback. So what we have done is that we have printed the slides. So I guess industry people who have not taken this, if you could help them and see who are the industry people, they should get a copy of these. Because the more you pay attention and you say, oh, this doesn't make sense, we need your feedback. Yeah, please provide that. We have some time at the end because there may be synergies between different fields, but if there is a specific questions about ag, we could cover it right now. That's a very good question. So I think some of the details of that will come in. Rahim will describe in the afternoon. So the question is the food spoilage. Is it yes or no, and how quantitative?
Right now we're in the yes and no situation. Right now, that was a question. Yeah. So right now we're looking at, for example, hypoxanthine, pH. These are kind of parameters. A lot of actually meat kind of spoilage is actually based on expiration date or color or something. But this will kind of just tell you, okay, really if it's spoiled or not, right? So this right now is your kind of same one. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Thank you. And I think one of the other areas we have work, you know, maybe in the poster sessions you will hear, is things in the past which were yes and no, how can you quantify them? And you know, for example, pregnancy test is easy, kind of yes and no. One of the work that happened in Professor Leah Estancio's group is using some of the image analytics to see how much you can quantify. And they're able even to quantify the quantity of the bacteria. I don't know exactly to what CFUs they got it, but there was a work here. You can hear about that during the posters. Other questions, comments?
So the temperature monitoring, so how accurate?
It really depends on the functional kind of polymer that you coat on top of it. And so again, it goes back to the idea that I just mentioned. Right now, we're actually at high temperatures. Right? So because we're actually using a polymer that's highly, for example, it has to be.
The question is, what is the temperature sensitivity?
Oh, sensitivity of which one? For as a sensor you're talking about? Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So right now, we have an antenna that actually responds. For example, the resonant frequency changes with response to change in the environmental temperature. So in order to make that happen, we actually have to coat it with some kind of polymer or something that is temperature responsive, right? Right now, we have like polymers that are responsive, but they actually have to change a lot, right? So this, yes. Like, yeah, something in that kind of order, right? So it's some.
You can have the temperature recording over time, right? So every minute or every 10 minutes or something like that.
Right now, because it's actually remotely, so it really depends. You have to have that kind of reader close to the. So it's just single measurements right now.
So you cannot store in the.
You can, but the reader has to be directly in contact. Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
In this application.
Exactly.
What in the poster session, you will see the ones that the sensors have memory and storage in it. This one is purely passive, and you can read it with a reader when how often you bring the reader close by. By the way, these antennas that are used for microbial sensing and food sensing, each of your industry people will get 5 of those antennas. And this is your voting coupons for the posters. So each poster will have a little, bag next to it, and you have 5 coupons. You can choose, give 1 of these tags to each 5 posters, or you can give 3 to 1 and 2 to the others. Up to you. And the posters with the highest number of coupons will get some rewards. Any other questions? Well, so let's go to the next one. Oh, yes. Sorry, please. Yes, Mike.
Oh, thank you.
Oh,
Is
yes.
it on? Okay. So this isn't particularly high tech, but one of the things that I think would save billions of dollars in food costs is if people better understood what the expiration date meant. So there might be an education component about that you can work on as well, because I know I work in medical devices, and I know that the date on there has to do with what data you have, not necessarily when it goes bad. So,
Thank you, thank you. You said there was a question online? No, I said we get people online. Oh. Microphone. Oh, thank you. Or we repeat it here. So let's see. Sure. I think next we have Chiwan, correct? I don't see Jackie here. Let's see if this one, the usual thing. At least if I find a pointer, we can do it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Purdue. My name is Chi-Hwan Lee, and I'm an associate professor of biomedical and mechanical engineering at Purdue. Today, I'm really pleased to introduce some of our collaborative research project, which is about sticker-like electronics. So basically, my lab has been focused on the development of a sort of a transfer printing technology, which allows you to physically separate whatever thin film devices from its fabrication substrate so that you can paste it onto wherever you want. So as an example, in the field of display, so we can have you utilize whatever existing manufacturing facility for flat display. And then at the last moment, we can physically separate the functional display panel from its rigid substrate, quartz or wafer, whatever substrate, so that you can reduce the thickness, you can reduce the weight, and you can reuse this fabrication substrate for another manufacturing process to reduce the manufacturing cost. And this separated thin film device is now very thin. That means it can be flexible. So you can make it curved display or flexible display at a very low cost. So that's what we do. So you can apply this technology for some of useful biomedical devices as well. So this example shows the sum of sensors that is fabricated on biocompatible and flexible and breathable substrate tailored for this neck area. So this can be used for tele-rehabilitation of patient with a vocal cord dysfunction. So here, main thing is that we want to have people get this rehabilitation process exercises at home so that we can reduce the number of clinic visits, which is very important, particularly throughout this ongoing pandemic. And this is not actually human hand. This is actually our smart glove that is embedded with a number of sensors inside. So it can measure temperature, pressure, humidity, many others of interest. And this smartwatch can show its real-time data, so which could be useful for prosthetic hand users in their daily life. This is actually also a movie as well. This is our horse with our the blanket, stretch blanket. So it has a sensor functionality embedded inside. So it can measure respiration rate or muscle activity under ambulatory condition in a wirelessly controlled fashion. So particularly this horse is just got retired from racing due to the asthma. So we want to measure respiration rate throughout the day and overnight so that people get benefit from it. So more recently, our lab is more focused on these eye-wearable biomedical devices. Human eye is actually much more challenging body part comparing to the skin, which is smaller, softer, and very sensitive to pain. So what we do is we're actually using FDA-approved, commercially available soft contact lenses from Johnson & Johnson or Cooper Vision, whatever lens manufacturers. And then we print these very mechanically soft, stretchable, flexible sensors on the peripheral area so that we don't block the visions. And then it can measure intraocular pressure in a continuous fashion, which would be very particularly useful for patients with glaucoma. There are millions of glaucoma patients out there, but the thing is that they lose their eyesight while they are sleeping, without any sign, without any pain. That's the problem. But currently, there's no way to measure IOP while you are sleeping. So that's the gap we're trying to tackle. So take-home message is that we have capability of changing its form factor of your device. So if you work with some sort of devices and you don't like your form factor, your devices, you don't like it's rigid, you don't like it's heavy, you don't like it doesn't look ugly, I can change it. I can I can employ some of my fashion sensor sense into the device layout, and then I can make it flexible or stretchable, biodegradable, or look better. So this is what we do. So please let me know if you see any collaboration opportunity. Thank you.
Questions for Chi Huan?
Yep.
If you can get the microphone.
Very cool. Just curious, like how do you power these things? I can understand the printing aspects, but
Yeah.
how do you power them?
So that's the how do we power these things? I think you are asking about the peeling techniques.
You know, it's so much like
The power
Yeah.
source. Okay, I see.
Yeah.
So it depends on devices. These devices powered by the electromagnetic field basis wireless powering. So you gotta have a sending antenna nearby 3 centimeters. So you're using eyeglasses or sleeping pad during the overnight measurement. That's the sending antenna, and this is the receiving antenna. So you measure pressure, it's sending the resonance frequency changes. So we can measure the pressure in a wirelessly controlled fashion. But this case is the horse is very big. It's a large animal, so we can put additional small boxes that include the Bluetooth and rechargeable battery, all that stuff, microcontrollers and so on. So we have no problem. But this rehabilitation process takes only 30 minutes per rehabilitation exercise. So we have also reusable small boxes that is clipped on your shirt. And this patch is actually disposable patch. It's very cheap, very expensive. So you can connect it during the rehabilitation process, and all the rechargeable battery and my Bluetooth and so on is here. So.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Next, we go a little even more inside for implantable devices.
All right. I don't have as good of a fashion sense as Chi-Huan does, so my device is a little bit more uglier, but hopefully with the manufacturing technique, we can make them a little bit prettier. All right.
Swap it here so that next time we can do it right.
Do you have the clicker? This one?
No, that's okay.
Clicker?
I know.
Oh, okay, I'll just use this. That's fine. That's fine, Chi-Huan. That's okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Hugh. I'm an associate professor of biomedical engineering. I also direct the Center for Implantable Devices we have at Purdue. Purdue has a history of having a strong implantable expertise with this founding of the biomedical engineering department with experts from Texas we brought in, who has been pioneers in creating implantable electronic devices. So we're trying to reestablish that excellence and at scale, obviously, with these kind of new technologies and next generation of medical devices. So we're going to talk about a couple examples of different kinds of medical devices that we make with microscale sensors and actuators that we create using thin film technologies. So one of the things that at Purdue that we highlight and focus is the fact that we want to create devices and technologies that not only is cool and makes nice splashes and create new papers, but we also want to take it to the next level, actually make it useful for people, clinicians and patients and things like that. So we're trying to really leverage the new technology, new fabrication methods, and also try to understand the limitations of existing medical devices so that it can augment and accelerate the transition from the lab to the clinics. So here's some examples of our devices that we're creating for implantable applications, a lot of these things. So some of the things that we'll talk about is these, the idea of having adding additional functionalities to existing medical devices like catheters, and creating a novel and more reliable medical devices like for neural interfaces. Because when you think about implantable devices, what you want to do is you want to make sure that the device functions for a long time. You want to be able to have additional features so that it can give you more data for you guys to understand how the body is changing over time. So that's kind of the focus of our research. And I'll highlight a couple of these devices, but I'd be happy to talk to you about some of these other implantable sensor work that we're also working on as well. So the first example is creating a novel neurointerventional devices for stroke treatment. There's different kinds of stroke, but the ones that we're going to talk about is for hemorrhagic stroke. And one of the examples of hemorrhagic stroke that occurs, actually this project started from trying to come up with better medical devices for treating hydrocephalus, which is a disorder that is characterized by large accumulation of fluid in the brain. And the treatment for that is to basically add a catheter into the brain and then drain the excessive fluid from the brain. But as you can see on the bottom right, that there's a lot of occlusion that happens because the body has a lot of proteins and cells and things like that that it requires. But whenever you put these kind of foreign materials, it creates this kind of cascade of inflammatory responses that render some of these implantable devices, not very reliable for a long time. So we had the idea of creating this, magnetic actuator for therapy, for being able to actually remove these kind of devices. The concept is very clear. If you ever played with any kind of magnet and compass, you can see how you can control the movement of these kind of magnet tether devices, right? So if you apply a magnetic field from the outside, it can cause a lot of forces, and that force can be used to be able to essentially clean the inlet pores of these kind of catheters. So you can see how the device can be actuated to be able to knock off these kind of hematoma blood clot that we placed on top of the catheter. So and another things that we could do is to integrate these different kinds of thin film fabricated sensors to understand whether the device is functioning properly. You can see whether there's flow going through, we can see whether the device is actually clogged, and we can also see whether the device was successful in actually being able to remove whatever was occluding the pore. So we can use these kind of smart sensing to be able to do this kind of closed loop therapy for how the device is functioning in the body. So long story short, what we wanted to do is how can we use this technology for more acute hydrocephalus, more acute hemorrhagic stroke? Because when there's a bleeding in the brain, a lot of times that blood can get into this part of the brain that can cause hydrocephalus. And the name of the game is to be able to remove the blood clot as soon as possible. If you just let it sit there for a long time, then you have a higher risk of death and long-term disability. But there's not a lot of existing therapy that can accelerate the removal of the blood clot. So we were thinking of using this device and placing it immediately after an animal has a stroke and seeing if the device can be useful in accelerating the clearance of the blood clot that forms inside the brain. And as you can see at the top, when you just don't have these kind of microscale actuators inside, the blood doesn't really get removed as much as you want to. It actually just sits there. Whereas if you use our smart catheter that has this self-clearing capability, you can see the clearance of the blood is much, much improved. And if you look at the bottom right figure, the survival rate of this device has improved significantly, which we're really excited about. So we're trying to take this thin film augmented medical device into the next level by working with our clinicians to really start the next generation of clinical trials to be able to ask some of these questions about how the device can be useful for treatment of hemorrhagic strokes. Just switching gears, I'm going to talk about another thin film device that we're trying to use to be able to improve the functionality as well as the reliability of these devices. We're trying to target better stimulation of vagus nervous system, which is a peripheral nerve that can be used to treat a lot of different things, including epilepsy and more recently gut microbiome issues and inflammation and things like that. So one of the fundamental studies we've done was to be able to play with the design of these microelectrode designs and then being able to see if we can impart a larger amount of charge onto the substrate, neural substrate, to be able to overcome some of these issues that these microelectrode arrays typically have. And that if you try to put too much charge into this, the devices actually will degrade faster. So we're trying to use these kind of microfractal shapes to be able to overcome those things, because you can take advantage of some of these edge effects that happens with these kind of fractal designs to be able to have better penetration, which also means we can potentially use these to be able to better target the underlying neural substrate. We also wanted to make sure that when we do interface with our thin film devices, it can actually withstand the different kind of mechanical pressures that it experiences. Because the nerve actually, when you put these kind of cuff electrode around the nerve, it actually swells and deswells. There are some sort of mechanical issues that can prevent the long-term functionality of devices. So we're trying to make this more compliant and stretchable electrodes for vagus nerve system. So we created this kirigami structure electrodes that can be conforming to the surface, as well as minimize pressure and be very flexible so it can withstand the different kinds of potential movement that you have in the body and impart a lot of charge that is necessary to be able to stimulate the underlying neural structures. So just to kind of give you a high-level overview, we were able to fabricate this using conventional microfabrication technique, but we can certainly leverage some of these advanced manufacturing techniques like roll-to-roll and even printing. We can actually create these kind of devices, although it will be a little bit more time-consuming. But we were able to demonstrate that you can fabricate this and stretch it and show that the functionality remains the same. We were also able to implant this into a rat model and demonstrate we can actually use this to stimulate and show that these fractal microelectrodes indeed do have better performance in terms of being able to activate the underlying neural structures for a given amount of current that you inject compared to the normal Euclidean design devices. So in summary, for these ones, we were able to, for the first time, demonstrate that these microelectrodes actually have better capability to stimulate the different fibers in the vagus nerve, which is what we want, and we also use less energy to be able to do this. And also we worked with previously Jiyoung Chen's group to understand how we can potentially protect this from corrosion issues that happens when you apply too much current onto the electrode surface. So these are just a couple of examples of some of the implantable efforts that we have going on. There's a lot of opportunities to essentially augment existing medical devices with these kind of thin film sensors and actuators, and I'd be happy to talk to you guys more about some of these opportunities. Thanks.
Time for questions?
What kind of life do you think these microelectrodes would have? So the question is, what kind of life do we expect from these microelectrodes?
We have a very specific target because these existing devices do last for, well, for the most part, the leads have longer lifetime periods than the actual implantable pulse generators, which only last about 6 to 10 years. So we have that kind of target in mind to be able to do this. And in terms of corrosion, these devices that are coated with diffusion barriers like graphene can last longer periods. Yeah.
If you can wait for the microphone.
Thank you. A related question. What is the difference in adhesion, effective adhesion, between a fractal electrode and a circle electrode? Have you been able to study that yet?
The addition of the materials onto the polyimide substrate has been the same, if I remember correctly. We didn't have any lamination issue. We do have potential issues with the graphene protection at the end because it is more thinner and potentially less mechanically stable, but we haven't really done more thorough examination of that.
Do you have a way to make two-layer or something so that you can create cathode-anode pairs so that you can actually, because electrical polarization can have effects on cell growth, on antimicrobial, all kinds of things. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that's, some people have used electric field to be able to remove bifouling and things like that, and we're looking into that as well, but that, the amount of force you can generate using that to be able to repel things have been, I think, multiple factors or maybe an order of magnitude lower than that we can generate with mechanical forces, so which is the reason why we went that way.
But I guess the question is, can you do multiple anode?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. There's these are electrode arrays. You can do current steering. You can have different ways to stimulate one pair, multiple pairs, and things like that as well.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess in some sense we are exactly at the time for the industry. Part of the reason we put this time is, often you hear a talk, this is, the challenges they are working. One of the issues about this, whenever you bring a new technology, is economy of scale. Okay, you like these, how can I get, 10,000 of these or 100,000? Who is willing to pay the first 10,000? That's the problem. Eventually, the price will come down. And so what happened is that if you look at the history in the case of semiconductors, everybody says the success of semiconductors came from radio transistors. But if you look at the history, that's not the case. The first radio transistors were not cheap the way you would think it today. Only with the scale up we could bring the cost down. And they were not also high performant. Who knows actually what was the breakthrough for semiconductors to become a viable technology? Nobody have seen this, what is crystal fire? They have a history of semiconductors. What happened is that, in late 50s when they had the first transistor, they knew this is a good technology, but again, things are not reliable, it's not yet the low cost. So there's a story that Westinghouse had a research group of 100 people. Westinghouse was a top the tube type radios. They said, we need to be on top of these. And the research group made a lot of prototypes, but they were not better than the radio. They could not sell it. And eventually what happened to them? They went out of business. But what really started that was hearing aid. You could not make a vacuum tube hearing aid. There's just a form factor, doesn't work. And people are willing to pay more. The first commercial success was that. Once they had the initial success, they could control some of the yields, they could bring the cost down, then the other market started. So part of the challenge we have, a lot of the things you saw today potentially can be very low cost, correct? We are not talking about nanometer technology. These are printing, laser processing, and so on. But to bring this to market, we need some kind of early applications where people are willing to pay more, and then we can optimize it. That's one. The second part of it is a lot of the things you hear, maybe you can look at in the journals. Many universities are also working on this type of devices, different flavors. One important thing for us was there is a difference between 5, 10, 20 type device fabrication to a couple of hundred to 1,000. Because 5, 10, 20, always a graduate student, a good graduate student, they can make them happen. And that's what you need to write a paper. But to make to a couple of hundred or 1,000, then is not a good graduate student who could do it. And a lot of professors know you have a graduate student dependent effect. I could get this one working, the other person couldn't do it. Well, I don't know, there's a little secret sauce, what can we do? But that's not going to work for manufacturing. So what we have done is we have invested through the facility here something on the order of $8 million in tools. We could do a couple of thousands of these. And you will hear more in the common platform. So I think the reason I was mentioning this, I'm interested to see among these areas, applications, if there are needs that are unmet today, that's a good place to start a new technology. Because if there is already a technology, like what happened with the vacuum tube radios, it's very hard for a new technology to overcome it right away. By the way, this is the whole theory behind disruptive innovation, and people who have read Christensen's books. So that's what we are interested. Please think about it, and we are interested to collaborate. So that's number one. What are the unmet needs or things that where data could be helpful? The second area is you saw quite a bit of very different applications. We should have started, now that I think about it, the other way around. We should have started with the most expensive Hughes implantable things because you know how hard they are, and then go to the wearables and then go to the ag. Well, we started the other way around. But the building blocks, which is flexible, which is printable or a large area, are similar. So that's where we can learn from each other. And the second part of it, and again you hear in the common technology, is this is just the hardware. How do you get actually a data out of it? And always beginning hardware, there are variability, there are yield issues. And you will hear that this is actually an area AI could remove some barriers people 20 years ago they did not have. So we will discuss about that. We have maybe 5-10 minutes. Any thoughts, from people in industry? What are sore points, things that you don't find a good solution, either to do the job you are doing, or there is, but it's just too expensive? Anybody willing to share? Ask a hard question. Low power, low cost. How about free? Is that okay? But I guess my question is, let's be a little more precise, because we can innovate with system definitions. What do you mean by low power? What do you mean by low cost? A few cents per sensor, I guess depends on applications. And what do you mean by low power? If you can be more specific, then we can discuss.
People are interested in collecting data, as much. Everybody's looking for data now, right? So, and you want to get the right sensor in the right place at the right location, right? So all of that. And there are sophisticated sensors that will do that, but they don't last long, right? Every time you have to go and do something with the battery or take it out of service and put it back again, that's a lot of cost. So people are looking for something that they can deploy on a larger scale. That's where the low cost comes in, and not having to go and power it again and again. That's the other area. So I'm coming more from the manufacturing.
Thank you. Good. Yes.
I would add to low power, low cost, long range. If you have to get close to a reader to make a sensor work, then that dramatically reduces its viability. Now, I know you can't expect things to work for a mile or hundreds of meters, but the farther you can go, the better, because an entire warehouse of things could be read, for example, or whatever. So,
thank you. So in your case, these are more of inventory and so on, and you need tens of meters on that order, tens of feet. Other questions, comments? Yes, Scott. Thank you.
To try to give like a very specific example is monitoring inside of say you have a fertilizer pile of finished goods that can be the size of multiple football fields, or if you're at an elevator outside of or an elevator that's receiving grain, you have a pile of corn grain that's over the size of a football field. the ability to basically embed sensors that would have to be biodegradable throughout a pile to be able to monitor the various quality aspects of that finished good. So you could think about it inside of a grain bin as well. Instead of just a single probe, rather just kind of multiple points throughout that pile, measuring temperature, humidity, or whatnot. But then the key is being able to sense it from outside the pile a decent ways. So it's just like an example of like managing large areas to where you can't get inside of the pile, but measuring various parameters from outside the pile.
So what are some of the parameters? Maybe you mentioned temperature, anything else kind of?
The list can go on. Just example for grain or fertilizer, like heat, moisture, relative humidity. I know you guys have like VOC. If you're thinking grain and you want to be able to understand if there's mycotoxin kind of development within your grain bin, like there's a whole myriad, but I think at least to start, temperature and moisture would be a huge one.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes, you can please.
So I'm thinking the same thing, but it's not only, inside, and then also because we are from the agriculture company, and then we're looking for some sensors and can monitor the whole field, and then it's very large field, and then temperature, humidity, soil moisture, light intensity, that kind of environmental factors we can monitor, and then in real time and over time, and then can collect a lot of data. We can get it, easy to manage the field and get a high yield from that field. So
Maybe if you can say a few words, how you said measure continuously. Is it once a day good enough for you? One every hour?
yeah, at least like every hour or 15 minutes or something like that. So it's that a lot. It will be a lot of data, and then so connect how to process the data is another issue. So.
Other comments, feedback? Yes. I guess maybe you can. Which side?
What are ways to define the uniqueness of a sensor? So I'm thinking of the laser etched sensors in particular. If I have, let's say, 10 of them in a space, how can I put some feature on the sensor to uniquely identify them if they're interrogated at the same time?
Very good question.
I can try to answer that. I think Rahim's, the specific way is essentially the laser processing, and to make the whole, sensing process or the device cost effective. The physics behind that is that, let's say that you have an antenna architecture, and then he uses a specific kind of coating, and let's say that that coating has been subjected to a pH value, certain value, let's say 6 or 7, so it goes up, then that shell, the coating, that starts to dissolve. And then there is a base antenna, as well as there is another one which is now exposed. And when it is exposed, so that will have the two different resonant frequency, and they basically try to monitor that, and that's where they can get some data out of it. So that's one way. Another way can be the capacitance, which essentially is that depending on that, some of the materials can be, hydroscopic. So if that case, that if the humidity level goes up or something like that, then the capacitive value can change, right? So I think those are the ways, the current thought process in context of the laser-based printing. So because the laser-based or any of these printing, they're very good for conductive materials, or if there is on the insulating materials. If you are thinking about a pure semiconducting materials, then these processes are yet to make a lot of leap ahead, the advances before they can reach and match the performance that is required.
I guess part of your question was multiplexing. How many of them you will have a unique identifier, correct? That was...
Yeah, because I'm assuming these sensors can't have any memory. So if I had multiple sensors, do I just have multiple resonant frequencies or something like that?
Yeah, so I think the answer is with the small changes in geometry, you can shift the peaks and you can have multiple peaks in almost encoding. So this is called, almost like physical encoding. So you could design an antenna with 3 peaks or 4 peaks, and then depending how they position to itself, you code. So you can identify. So you have an array of antennas, and the reader goes, and you know something. This is antenna 1, antenna 2, or 3. The next level of it, there are wireless powering of standard RFID. You know, the keys that you have, they have tiny chips. The cost will go up a little. Again, these chips for RFID is still very cheap. And you can remotely read the key number. That gives you unique identifier. You can even do security and so on. So if you're willing to put some IC chips, there are possibilities, even without power, remote power.
There is a comment. When it comes to the antennas and your reader, what is the limiting factor on the distance between the reader and the antenna? Is it the size of the antenna?
Of course.
What would it take?
And the power of the reader.
And the power of the reader.
And the power of the reader has, FDA regulations and so on, because otherwise you cannot have living. So the power of the reader is almost regulated. Then the rest is size of the antenna, and the size of the antenna is cross section.
Okay.
I would like to actually confirm on this one that I have a pretty loud voice.
No, but for the lights.
I think that what we are learning here is that you are very much as collectively interested about the cyber physical system, which essentially is about the communication, maintaining the data, get the data, from that perspective, if you think about just NFC technology, right, near field communications, that's only going to be a meter. If we think about a Bluetooth technology, it's going to be only 50 meters or so. So what we are looking for from that perspective is essentially how we can send the data directly to cloud. That means that, let's assume that you have 100 sensors, they talk to each other, but one of them is going to be representative of all these data, do the processing in situ, and then send the filtered data to the cloud. So that has to be very powerful. So this way, 99 of them are going to be cheaper and do small talk, but then the one would be the nodal representation that becomes a stronger one, right? So that's how it's going to be a mix and match of the technologies. NFC, 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 then Bluetooth, and then just redirect to the cloud.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Good. So I think we are at the end of this session. The next session we'll discuss about now some of the building blocks of the technology that can produce this type of sensors. So I think, do we have next? If I can get it, Miko. Do this. Is it sharing? Am I sharing the screen? Is this?
One more time, I would like to request our guests and visitors to take the responses.
Here, I'll trade you back up.
Good morning. Welcome to Purdue. You heard this morning several examples of very interesting sensors. And so one of the issues, as Ali just a minute ago pointed out, is how you can get them into scale up and production and in marketplace. So for the past 7 years, we've been investing into the hardware development in Purdue to help facilitate development of hundreds, if not thousands, of these sensors, and then investigate the processing science associated with the scale-up. So I'm going to show you some examples, and since you are not able to go into the clean room and so on, I'm going to show you some videos of these equipment just to give you a flavor of our capabilities. So for all of these, do we have a pointer or just a mouse? Okay. So for many of these sensors, as you know, there needs to be an electrode. So we have invested into a screen printer and I'll show you a video of that in a minute. So that can make hundreds of electrodes on any type of substrate that you might have, dielectric, metallic, any other one. This particular unit is in a clean room environment. We call it a Maxwell, and it is designed to do multiple functions, and I'll give you some examples of that. And simultaneously, you can also make coatings in an inert atmosphere. So you can make some functional materials without the effect of environment, such as moisture and oxygen. And so the final stages is basically, as you saw in Rahim's presentation, is a laser processing that you can actually do an ablation. He just demonstrated the antenna that you just talked about. But at the same time, you can also do a singulation, taking out the pieces that you have manufactured. So this particular one is a commercial machine, and I'll show you the video of it. This happens to be feeding out a sheet of polyester, PET, and you can see this is an intermittent continuous process where we can screen print. It's coming up shortly. Conductive layers. This happens to be carbon-based conductive material that is being printed. It also has towers that you see here does the curing. As you can see, that large number of electrodes can be printed for further statistical analysis and other related issues. So this is essentially a scale-up process. This Maxwell that we've designed in my group has a multiple functions. You can, any type of delivery of materials, solution, monomer, or a melt can be done onto a substrate. You can functionalize it by, for example, electrospraying or electrospinning nanofibers, for example. This happens to be a transparent conductive film that we developed that has conductive nanofibers actually embedded in it, so that the delamination issues are eliminated for flexible transparent electrodes. And melt casting is also possible to exclude the solvent from the process. And the solution processing can involve also a unique characteristics of this machine is that you can apply electric field or organize particles that are dispersed in the polymer precursor. So with the same concentration of, for example, barium titanate, you essentially double the dielectric constant of the material without having to increase the concentration. This happens to be also a demonstration of microcomputer tomography, that the nickel nanoparticles are organized with a 2.7 Tesla magnet into columns, essentially nano particle columns that are separated by dielectric. Excuse me, that's useful for piezoresistive sensors for very low cost sensors. They have extreme anisotropies, very high conductivity in thickness direction, and no conductivity in the plane. And we also have a similar kind of examples that I'll show you in a minute. This happens to be the picture of the machine that is inside the Class 100 clean room. The purpose of this was so that we can keep the dust-free environment when we have an open air solutions onto our carrier. The other elements of this is that's become very useful lately is that we have actually built a tunnel in the systems that we can purge the tunnel with inert gases, so that if there is a moisture sensitivity or oxygen sensitivity, we can actually eliminate that from the environment. There's also additional features such as xenon pulse forge for heat treatment or UV curing if we're using UV curing units. So this happens to be a video of a demonstration of solution casting. We have a number of casting methods. One of them is, as you see, is a small slot dies. Excuse me. And so here it's demonstrated for nitrate sensors I'm going to talk about in a minute. This particular machine, we are also currently instrumenting it. Here's an example of an instrumentation where we do a continuous monitoring of thickness, for example, with sensors, both the confocal sensor as well as the line scan camera that actually captures the surface topography of the material for additional further statistical analysis and machine learning that our colleagues are performing. This is the line scan camera system that's here. We're also adding edge analytics into this machine for further incorporation into the machine learning and artificial intelligence in the future. It is being developed right now. The other is the singulation that Rahim just briefly showed it to you. This happens to be a very useful tool for us. We can actually either ablate, as Rahim demonstrated, or we can singulate. This happens to be a video that during the COVID, we made about 40,000 face shields and distributed to the hospitals in Indiana. And this is where we were running this almost 24 hours a day. Our scientists, heroes, were doing this. As you can see, that face shield is being cut out from the PET layers. You can ablate, or you can basically cut them out, as you can see in the roller. So there's going to be a demonstration. Dr. Nick Glassmaker is going to have at 11:30 in the back in 1100A room. You will be pointed to that for antenna manufacturing. All right. So I'll give you 3 examples. This happens to be one example of nitrate sensors that many colleagues have worked on extensively. The idea is to have a flexible substrate. You are printing electrodes, and then you print ion-selective membrane on one of the tabs of the electrode, and then passivation layer. And then so we use the Kinzel, and then we have another machine called Mervac roll-to-roll coating system that basically coats the passivation layer. Here's a little sensitivity test for various compositions of the nitrates, which is critical for agriculture runoff water detection. That's proven to be very valuable, and it's been instrumented and connected through LoRa systems and for long-range transmission of local measurements of nitrate sensors. This is another demonstration of one of our industrial presenters is sitting in the front, Anna, a PhD thesis. And this happens to be essentially making pesticide sensors, and that's used this Maxwell machine. It has many requirements, including screen printing the silver electrodes, graphene nanoplatelets, and the zirconia nanoparticles are generated by these electro spraying systems, and then subsequently calcinite, and then subsequently the silicon passivation layers put on top of it. And the whole, the system has turned out to be rather robust, high stability, and rather high sensitivity, 0.2 ppm, as you can see here. The last one that I'm going to show you is to demonstrate this machine's capability to make ultra low cost and ultra sensitive piezoelectric films. The idea is to take a piezoelectric ceramics, which are naturally brittle, and make them into a micro and nano powders, and then mix it into a precursor and cast it onto a carrier and apply electric field. By applying the electric field, you basically get, this is a time sequence, you can form these extreme-oriented nanocolumns in the material, so in the thickness direction. So this allows you, here's a demonstration of it. Pipette is actually dropping milligram quantities of material, and you can see the signal that's coming off of it. So you can detect milligram quantities with this sensor. That costs about 50 cents per square inch with this process. Here's a demonstration of it with different process conditions. This is electric field application, so higher electric field gives you a better organization, and you have a higher sensitivity. You're looking at pressure is basically what the weight is converted into a pressure, and you can see on the order of 150 to 200 milliwatts detection is possible with this sensor. So these are just 3 examples. There are obviously other sensor manufacturing scale-up in the works right now. The other interesting thing about this sensor is that it's actually transparent because you have particle depletion zones, so light can pass through the film, so you can make very unique transparency out of it. So we have 2 talented staff members, Dr. Glassmaker and Mr. Telesniki, and they are in charge of all these scale-up activities, and they are ready to work with the industry. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions about the capabilities? If not, since we are a little behind, maybe we go to the next one. At the end, we should have 5 minutes for question and answer as well. Next, I guess Saeed Mohammadi will discuss some of the electronics that we are developing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Purdue, and I'm going to talk very briefly about our capability on active transistors, active devices, and circuits that we can offer to help you integrate your systems. So our goals is are to have very low power systems so that you can actually operate them without battery. And one way to communicate with them is, of course, wireless. So most of the systems we are working on are wireless, batteryless systems. And to be able to provide power to these devices, you want to have some sort of transducer. We are offering wireless powering, but you could also add solar cells or other means of powering if you need to. And then at the same time, we're offering transistors that can be used for signal conditioning, amplification, and multiplexing, in addition to rectification that is needed for wireless powering. So let me go through the 3 different topics that I want to talk about very briefly. So single chip systems, we are using CMOS technology, advanced CMOS technologies to make the entire system on a single chip. And then we offer transistors, printed transistors that you could actually use for wireless powering or any other applications that you have in mind. And then, you know, the capabilities that are available here, including the screen printing, have been used to make sensors, antennas, and interconnects. So on the single chip systems, I have a couple of examples. These are the very tiny sensors. They are about the same size as a piece of dust, barely can be seen. And you can actually communicate with them because they have an antenna. And we carve these out of a CMOS chip, so you can actually see how thinner they are. They're about 10 to 15 micron thick, and then about 500 by 500 micron is the size of these devices. There is about 1,015 transistors on them, and you can actually read temperature and humidity using these. Another example is something we did last summer. This is the entire system that has an electrode. It looks like a comb, and they implanted it in the brain of a mouse, in the visual cortex, and they started showing pictures to the mouse. And we were able to see the neuron firing as they showed these pictures. And everything was done wirelessly, and also power transfer was wirelessly. Moving on to the next capability, which is printed transistors. We're using screen printing to make these solution-based oxide semiconductor transistor by combining indium oxide, zinc oxide, and gallium oxide into a mixture that is like an ink. And we print it on large areas, and we can make transistors that way. These are suitable for rectification mostly, but you could also get amplification and multiplexing if needed. Compared to what is available in the market, let's say if you want to use thin film transistors, electron mobility of IGZOs are much higher, about 20 centimeters squared per volt second. And they have a very good on to off current ratio, which means when you turn them off, there is no leakage current. And that actually is a very good application for energy storage if you want to use the capacitance of the transistor as supercapacitor. And they tend to have very small threshold voltage, which means they're actually good for rectification. These are some of the measurements that we have done recently. In terms of printing sensors and antennas, we have used Kenzel machine to do screen printing. This was a project done for NASA. But before I get there, I'm going to talk about the application that we have in mind. So if we combine these antennas printed on any substrate, flexible substrate, with the transistors, we can actually make a wireless powering system that is very, very cheap and can provide power to your systems. On the topic of these interconnect and sensor design, we did a project for JPL. We printed these micrometeorite sensors. These are impact sensors. So when something hits the spacecraft, you can actually detect how severe is the damage and decide whether this spacecraft has been damaged completely or not. And this was done using screen printing and some electronics on the side. So we could basically scan the rows and columns and see where the damage has been done. This was tested by a hypervelocity gun. And you can see that there are 3 layers. So the first layer has a damage of about 7 millimeter using this, I think, 3 kilometer per second bullet that was fired into the sensor. And then as the bullet goes in, it actually makes bigger and bigger holes. It opens up like a cone. And right now, this is on ISS being tested on International Space Station. And the idea is to actually wrap this around a spacecraft garage, and when it's moving along, make sure it doesn't get hit by the meteorites. And with that, I would like to ask if you have any questions.
Questions for Saeed? Maybe I guess one thing I didn't emphasize, the pictures doesn't show always the feeling of what is the size. One of the requirements they had was make a sensor that is 1 meter long. And this is what the students did. And you cannot do it one piece at a time. And having array with fine electrodes over a meter that are all working, that was the key challenge. But there are not many that often that students work. This is what students did in the lab, is now at the International Space Station, was just launched 2 months ago. So when they bring it back, we will study how the materials survive in space. Questions?
Since we have an interest in low power applications,
Maybe.
Since we have an interest in low power applications from our discussion this morning, can you explain again how your designs can be used for energy harvesting?
So you basically have an antenna that can harvest energy from the stray electromagnetic rays around you. Let's say if there is a close by pole, or you could also power it using a horn antenna. So let's say I want to read that sensor, so I'm going to power it directly. So you can focus the beam towards that sensor. And And then the electromagnetic wave is an AC signal. It gets rectified and turned into a DC signal. And then you can power up your system. Now, we designed the systems, very, very low power systems, maximum 30 microwatt or, something like that, so that you can actually survive on the little amount of power that is available to you.
Maybe for people who are in applications, what is the distance from which you can power these?
Well, for that mouse application, we can put this above the cage. So it's about 15 centimeters that when the mouse moves, we can still power it. Of course, there is some problem because as the mouse moves and moves its head, we lose signal sometimes. But we're thinking about, providing power from sides as well. But you could do this over kilometers if you want.
Yeah, let's make sure we are going to the next talk on the analytics. Yeah, 10 minutes, thank you. The next one, you started with materials and then more active circuits. Now is about data. And my colleague Ashraf Alam is going to describe how we can get useful data from sensors that are not as precise.
Thank you, and welcome to Purdue. So the topic I want to tell you about that electronics historically used to be in a very comfortable environment of air-conditioned room, and in the comfort of your cell phones are always in the comfort of your pocket. But more and more, the next generation of electronics and thereby the sensors will be deployed in places which is both harsh and as well as uncontrolled. And whether that are these microsatellites or these millions of solar cells with the sensors embedded in the back, or for this particular discussion today, the sensors that are deployed to monitor the soil nutrients distributed across the field for smart sensing. Now, these types of sensors that are typically used is pretty simple. This is 150 years old, a potentiometric sensors. It has 2 electrodes and it doesn't require any power. So therefore, the way the 2 electrodes work is that you essentially have a selective electrode, the green one, that only allows the analytes that you're interested in, nitrate, pH, and all. And the voltage that you measure, this is directly correlated to the analyte concentration that you have. Nernst equation is 150 years old. And this has, of course, spawned a huge industry with many tens of billions of dollars of investment, of course, in water quality measurement, in terms of various agriculture, environmental monitoring, and so on and so forth. Now, this is so simple that one may think that all you have to do is to put it in a roll-to-roll machine, and then essentially put this various spray coat, print these membranes, and essentially throw them millions at a time, and thereby you have a smart sensor or a smart digital electronics, and revolution will happen immediately. It turns out life is not so simple. There is a reason why after they take your blood sample, they send it to a lab and you have to wait for a few days before you get a high precision measurement of your, let's say, the blood analyte contents. Once the technician or the lab that gets your blood sample, for example, or a soil sample from your garden, what they do that they generally will be in a temperature controlled environment, because Nernst equation, that T, kBT, that has to be controlled. And every morning or every few days, the technician is constantly calibrating the sensor so that N naught, which is sitting there, those are controlled. Only with these 2 things completely controlled in a high precision lab can you correlate psi to N. So therefore, you can say that if your sodium concentration in your blood had a certain value, that is indeed the value. It's not something different. Once you throw these sensors in the wild, of course, morning to noon, summer to winter, the T is moving all over the place. And so, and moreover, once you throw these sensors, bacteria colony can grow around your sensor. The sensor is degrading. You cannot put a technician with each sensor under the ground in order to calibrate them continuously. So the relationship between N and psi is broken because this temperature and N naught are uncontrolled. How are you going to get any reliable SIG sensing based on this unreliable, uncontrolled condition? So this is a fundamental challenge. I mean, this is nothing very deep. It is a fundamental challenge that in the wild, uncontrolled environment, this is a fundamental issue. And indeed, once we deployed our sensors that were created in the SMARTS consortium, we do find that this is moving, that the red sensor and the black sensor are moving all over the place. There is no value. You are trying to measure one quantity, but it is oscillating all over the place, degrading, having random jumps at different points, and you have no idea that how to get anything useful from any of this information. Yes, many sensors were made. Yes, the sensors were cheap, but at the end of the day, if they don't measure what you need to measure, what good is it? So the idea is, I'm an electrical engineer, and electrical engineers always, when there is a problem, they want to think about the solution in the system level. And one of the things that we generally do in the communication theory, that if somebody is trying to talk over a telephone and you are receiving a signal, then oftentimes that if, or email, for example, and if it gets corrupted on the way, so therefore what you do, you use redundancy, time as your friend. So you send it multiple times, and if there is an error, you correct the error, and thereby reconstruct on the other end the perfect signal the sender intended to send. Sensor we can view as a communication channel. This is a fundamentally new perspective, and that you have a certain signal. This is the analyte concentration of the field. This is the signal this field is trying to send you. This device is converting it into something that's essentially unrecognizable. Question is, given the green, how can you get the blue? This is the question that we want to answer, and how can friend and physics, time and physics, can help you to do this reconstruction back. That's what I want to tell you about. It turns out that although people didn't realize for 150 years, it turns out that Nernst equation, this physics of the sensors itself, gives you a way to measure its own temperature. That is, these sensors, although it's not a thermometer, it can be used as a thermometer. And the thermometer is what you have to do. Instead of having one sensor, you have to have two. And when you have two, the differential voltage between them, because it cancels, it's a log, it cancels it out. So therefore, you can measure instantaneous temperature, morning to afternoon, summer to winter, any variation in the temperature by measuring the difference in the voltages, by using the natural variation of the thickness of the sensors in the roll-to-roll process. So cheap is actually better because this N01 and N02, so long they are slightly different, the difference gives you the current, the temperature. And once you have the temperature, you have all this fluctuating, seemingly random things, this blue, green, and red, everything fluctuating. But as soon as you subtract, you find out that it is measuring the underlying temperature fluctuation during the morning to the afternoon. And once you correct it, all those fluctuations essentially goes away, and you have a relatively stable signal. And this then allows you to get precise measurement without having to think about temperature. If you try to do something like this with a temperature control, with embedding a thermometer, you would have to have a battery. And the battery would run out after a few days or few months. And in that case, but this one is it is doing self-temperature things. So therefore, there is zero energy consumption associated with temperature measurement. Now you can still see we are not fully happy. One of the sensors seems to be measuring things, but it still has not been corrected. It's still, after accounting for the temperature variation, it's still not fully done. And the way we solve that problem is essentially having a reference outside temperature, and by measuring the temperature S1, S2, and S3, This is measuring its own temperature, and anytime something is degrading over time, you can essentially see that the S1, S2, S3, their temperature, self-temperature will not agree. And when they don't agree, you can essentially recalibrate them. So because I want to go through this quickly, and that this is similar to that if you have a reference clock and you have a bunch of clocks in your home, after a few days, let's say after a year, if the clocks are not agreeing, 3 p.m. may not be equal to the same time, we don't throw the clocks away, right? It has degraded, we simply rewind it so that it gives you the right time. And so it's using the temperature as a degradation probe, we can continuously recalibrate and thereby get these high precision measurements using sensors that are degrading over time, and with the temperature fluctuation, these low quality sensors are constantly giving you high precision results. I will skip one because I'm running out of time. I'll just go to the end, that using this class of these ideas from the communication theory and using more than one sensor. I mean, typically we have one expensive sensors, but many low-cost sensors are far superior than a single high-cost sensors, because you can do things with many sensors collectively that you could not possibly do with one sensor that is of high precision. So that's all I had. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions.
Questions for Ashraf?
Yeah, at the beginning, I saw you can measure a different element like nitrate and then calcium, and then in the in the soil, right? Yes. Okay. In the water. Yeah, it's water runoff. I mean, if just the soil, we can measure that kind of thing element, and just not the water, and then in the soil in the soil.
Yes, so I guess the pictures, you can show it here, you can barely see it, but here is a bore well, and you have the sensor that is sitting in the water runoff in this particular case. Now you can go how to measure it in the soil if you don't want to measure it in the soil.
You can do it in the soil also. It is just the soil conductivity itself is varying depending on how much water you have in the system. So that needs to be accounted for as well. But because this is a voltage-driven potentiometric sensors, the current itself does not play any role in terms of voltage, but in terms of noise, it plays an important role because noise is proportional to the soil resistance.
I mean, in the soil, and the soil moisture will be different and change over time. And then, so because here you just measure water, and then if the soil moisture change, I mean, you still get the accurate measurement. So.
Because this membrane, so long it is saturated and wet, it is only taking in, let's say, nitrate or whatever values. Whether this is soil, moist soil, that is allowing the conduction, or whether it's a full water, that does not matter in terms of the voltage induced in the system. But the noise does matter in terms of, because this is a closed circuit, if it is a highly resistive, then there will be a fluctuation in the voltage. That depends on the resistance. So if you average, you will remember many of these analyte concentrations are changing slowly over hours. And you will have tens of thousands of repeated measurement, because let's say at 1 kilohertz, 10 measurements over this. So if you average it, then it doesn't matter regarding how noisy this system is, you will still get a reliable average value.
Just my question is what it kind of describes is you're helping remove the variability of these sensors, like with what Rahim is using in the field. Right. Is your concept of taking the variation among a bunch of sensors to get closer to the truth, is that already being implemented, that kind of concept with some of the other projects like Rahim sensors? Or is this just Is this being done separately and could be applied, or is it already being used in some of the projects you're doing?
I think he can answer that.
Yeah, actually, Ashraf works with several of us to introduce some of the algorithms and maximum likelihood estimations to give us more reliable, accurate signals over multiple sensors. So, yeah, very nicely integrated. I would say almost in a seamless fashion.
So I guess the application that Alex is working in is pharmaceutical application, but very different. Again, you need to measure some pH, you can correct it. But the data here shown over these 21 days measures nitrate in an actual farmer's field from the water runoff. It's not in our lab or so on. I guess lots of data, but this is actual farmer's field, not even Purdue's research lab. And this included the printed sensors that Rahim had and the wireless communication to send data to the farmer's home because you need something at a long distance. You don't have internet everywhere, but everything was included in this project. Yes?
Ashraf, this is really cool. I was wondering, as a polymer person, I was looking at this. So diffusion through the polymer membranes is temperature dependent. I wonder if you can tease more information out of your data. Now you're getting all these temperatures.
So the question you are asking is that when you have the green membrane, the transport through that membrane, green membrane, is temperature dependent. That is during the transition period when your concentration is changing from one value to another. Then there is this role of diffusion and transport. But once the potential forms, which is the dipole, it forms a dipole around the positive charges in the, let's say, in the green region and negative charges in the water. Once the dipole forms, there is no further transport. Right? So these are solid state potentiometric sensors.
I know. I was referring to the transients to see if you can use the transient data to
Transient, of course, contains a lot of valuable information. Yeah, of course.
I guess we are at the end of our session. Let's take 10-minute break and come back here at 10:03. That way, people who are live streaming, they don't have to wait too long. Thank you.
List of people from industry and their companies.
Maybe a logistical question. Is this model a part of the consortium IP?
There are Good morning, everyone. So the next session is about a project we have in the area of AI in manufacturing. And we discussed a lot in the morning about data coming from the sensors and some of the magic you can do with multiple sensors and analytics and so on. We have a separate project which is about how to make the manufacturing process more efficient. And as you know, manufacturing, the key is how to do it at low cost. Everybody knows how to make things quite well if you spend a lot of time. So doing it fast is important, and doing it low cost is important. So what we have talked this afternoon, second part in the morning, is a project we started about 2 years ago, which we call it AI in Manufacturing, or National Science Foundation Future Manufacturing Project. It's a collaboration with faculty at Purdue that includes manufacturing people, computer science and data analytics people, and our connections to our local companies. We have collaborators at Harvard. One of them came all the way last night, arrived, Vijay Janappa Reddy, on some of the analytics, Tuskegee University, and Ivy Tech for the workforce development. I want to say you a few words about what is this project about, and then toward the end you will see the connection to the rest. How we did this project is about 5.5 years ago, we started a project funded by Lilly Endowment called Wabash Heartland Innovation Network, WIN project. They gave us almost $20 million for a 5-year project to bring IoT in the ag and manufacturing in the region. And in the manufacturing area, you can see the map. Purdue is here, Tippecanoe County. We have quite a few rural counties. Oh, small details. Now they can see it. Thank you. It's good somebody checking. So during these 5 years, we had students who went to these companies and started with sensors and started analyzing them. And what we realized, there are multiple barriers. Everybody talks data analytics is good. Everybody wants to do data-enabled decision-making. But AI has not gained traction in manufacturing because of a couple of key factors: high cost or reliable sensing, and operation technology, information technology barriers. What happened is that in a factory, in any production, you have automation and so on, and this needs to be precisely controlled. You cannot be hacked and all of these, but the data that come from cheap sensors through internet could become a security issue. But the biggest challenge is that, as Ashraf mentioned, you put a sensor, it works for some months, but if you don't maintain it, things drift, and you cannot rely. If you are making 1,000 parts per minute, you need to really make it precise. But the other part of it is every manufacturing is slightly different. You don't have all the same machines. The third limitation is AI has done wonders because of availability of large data sets. Why your phone can recognize photos, cats, and so on, because there are databases of cats and dogs, and people have labeled them, and now your phones can use it. If you only rely on the data in your own company and a limited number of labels, there's not much you could do on the AI, or at least the deep learning side. Every company has some trade secret, some secret sauce, even though maybe 80% of what you are doing could be very common. You're afraid 5–10% not common come out. And finally, AI knowledge itself is quite hard to get. So our project has 2 ingredients. One of them is how to aggregate large data sets with privacy and confidentiality guarantees, and how to make sure that manufacturers keep control of their data. The idea that give us our data, your data, and then we make sure nobody hack. You hear always in the news, even the most advanced companies have their data breached. The idea is that let's not ask for the raw data, but let's be able to do analytics, and for that we have a collaboration that I will describe. The second part, the idea that in a factory you have thousands of sensors, you send all of that data to the cloud and somebody does analytic back to you, is first too expensive, and the second, you also cannot ensure that you don't leave non-proprietary. So edge analytics, what we call tiny machine learning, is a key part of it. So how this idea of data sharing could work, we are working with Latanya Sweeney. What she has developed through mydatacan.org is a platform, these different computer science jargons, like homomorphic encryption, federated analysis, and so on. Manufacturers could only share operations on their data, not the raw data. And what make it is that the AI commons, what we call it, will not have access to raw manufacturing data. And by doing that, then even if somebody asks us in court, we cannot release your data because we don't have it. It's doubly encrypted, but we are able to do analytics with it. Once the data is aggregated, then you can develop anonymized data sets, you can do competitions for students, or you can develop commercial solutions that come for the company. So that's on the data analytics side. The second part of it, what can you do at the edge? And Vijay has been very active in this. Today you can buy very low-cost devices, $30, $50, that not only have temperatures, humidity, microphone, camera, but they have TensorFlow Lite, they have processing, and you only send certain process data. The idea is that if you take images, vibration, this type of thing is lots of data. And if you just send raw data, first of all, it drains your battery. The second, because in the data, it could be some confidential information, you are not sure what you're sharing. But you can do local optimization, trading off speed, latency, memory, and so on, and only send some of these. And that's one of the edge analytics. What we have done in the last 2 years is that we are working with a series of companies where they have allowed us to have access to their actual manufacturing data. Kirby Risk is a local precision machining company. We have installed several sensors, TinyML. We take their own even machine language called G-code through MT Connect. We have some apps to record operator observation. And we have actually right now, they have so much trust, they gave us real-time access to their factory floor data for that machine. TMF, this is a very interesting solution. You will hear a little bit about it. They have given us electricity consumption for 4 tools that over a 4-month period produce hundreds of thousands of parts. And they say, only thing we have is the electricity of the tool. Can you tell us more analytics about what we made and what are some of the issues? Ray Magnet Wire is a company that has been around for 100 years. They make magnet wires for electric vehicles. Is important. They have shared 4 months of data. Premium is a local food processing company. They make sweeteners and other things, and they have shared some of the images. And a lot of these you will see it in the poster session. We have 10 posters about these collaborations. Subaru and Evonik, 2 big companies, never expect to get production data with them. It will take a while, but for the moment we are working with energy infrastructure. Air compressor uses a lot of energy. And if you could optimize its operation, it saves money. And it's not part of their core product. And we have just had recent data sharing agreement signed with them. So what we have done in the last 6 months or so, actually it's the last year or so, we have a series of workshops with industries. One workshop is how to get from existing devices. In a factory is full of motors, and variable frequency drive control these motors. There's lots of data, and the question is what analytics can you do with that? Second workshop is what is always missing is the context. People can give you, oh, this is the 2 years of data of this machine. And the data show machine operating and then not operating. Is it because the operator was on a lunch break or something broke? If you don't know the context, the machine data is useless. But the context right now is on people's heads or on handwritten. We are working on no-code applications to record it and complement the machine data. And the third one we just ran 2-3 weeks ago was to how install the smart sensors. So again, that's on the workforce work with the industry we are doing. What is our main goal at the end is to come with an AI toolkit for manufacturing. What is manufacturing? You have raw material coming into a manufacturer of one, go through a process, machine 1, machine 2, machine 3, and then you get to the end product. You get lots of data on each of these, and as material progresses, you want to monitor. What are the type of questions you are asking? Descriptive questions, how each of these tools, how efficient they are. It's called overall equipment efficiency, OEE. But to get that, you can know it by if the machine is on and off, but you need more than that. How about the machine was on but only produces scrap? That's not a part of a useful one. You need to context. How do you benchmark? Diagnostic is a case, something is bad here. Is it happening this step or this step of that step? Right now, with all the information we have, if you have a problem in the brake in your car, the data, first of all, goes to the car company. Now everything is connected. But it will take them 3 months to put all of their databases together to figure out which of the manufacturing step created that brake. And during these 3 months, what could happen to other cars with similar problems? There is a huge challenge. Predictive tools is more forward. Often the problem with manufacturing is input material is variable, output need to be the same. You always want your Coke or Diet Coke to taste the same. You cannot say this was a corn from Iowa, it's okay if it's a little sweeter, and this one was from Ohio and it should be different. No, you want consistency. And how people do it, you need manual operators adjusting it. How to do it automatically is one of the areas we are working. At the end, the numbers here, what manufacturers care? Throughput, how fast you make it, quality, cost, on-time delivery. With the pandemic, you realize how important it is. Sustainability and resilience are more and more. Sustainability, of course, if there's a metric for carbon and energy consumption, and resilience is what happens in disruptions. Big challenges, my last slide. The biggest issue is, if you look at one of these building blocks, is how to bridge the different datas. You get lots of tool data. You get hundreds of papers. I got this tool, and I can do predictive maintenance. That is helpful, but this tool, during these 3 months, produced 100,000 parts. 10 of them were not good. Do you know at which time, which part of the process, each part produced during the life cycle, how to connect the two is very hard. And I think the next talk, what Ashraf Alam, hopefully is still around, will talk about is how we can connect these two disparate areas using very simple low-cost sensors. So any questions for me? Then Ashraf, it's your turn. Professor Alam version 2.
I hope it's the improved version. All right. So the goal of this project is to see whether by looking at the power consumption of a component, whether we can say that what the machine is thinking. So as you know that we are awash with dead data. Data is coming from everywhere, whether it is the camera and keyboard for social networking, whether there is this millions of sensors behind each one of those solar farms, environmental monitoring, of course, industry produces voluminous amount of data, and the data is exploding. The question is, data is not information. Simply because you have more data doesn't mean that you have more insights and information about it. And the question is how to translate. That's the Google Translate part, the data into useful information that you can use for something to improve the process, to improve the productivity and all. Now, one of the fundamental insights, the previous one you also saw, I understand simple things. So I try to understand that what is it that provides information when we can do an EKG. The fundamental aspect of an EKG, as you know, in our lifetime, typically we have 2.5 billion of these heartbeats. And what is fundamental that this unit is repeating. It's also a motor, it's also a machine, and the unit is repeating. And once you have a mechanistic understanding of heart, then every little blips, every little spikes really carry an information. The doctors can tell you if the peak has gone down a little bit, then what does that whether a certain valve in the heart is not functioning properly. And you can do it without taking the heart out in the analytical lab and do the measurement. You can do it in situ, that without disconnecting anything, using the natural signal it automatically produces, then use it to tell it the story of itself, that when somebody is young versus somebody is older, population distribution, that what type of information one may contain. So this periodicity of the underlying process holds the key to translate from the data to information. So that is what the example I'm going to show you today. Now, before I go to the manufacturing data, let me tell you another area where we have used it very successfully worldwide in many solar farms. This algorithm is used. As you know, when the solar farms are set over there, you cannot go and individually interrogate everything. You will need thousands of people constantly measure things. But there is a natural experiment going on every day. The solar farms is out there because sun rises in the morning and then goes in the noon in the maximum and then goes and sets in the sky. And every day there is this natural repeat. And every day, therefore, the current is rising and falling. And just like the EKG, this slope of this line, the rate at which it rises and the way it falls and the maximum voltage, each one of them carries information about what is happening to the solar cell. You don't have to go and measure anything with a camera or anything. That will tell you whether the corrosion is happening, whether there's a solder bond failure, or whether a potential induced degradation. And we actually use this information to say how long this machine is going to, or the solar farm is going to last, and when you need to replace them. That saves a company tens of millions of dollars, because then you know predictive maintenance, you can do predictive maintenance, and you can replace parts that has sort of worn out. Using the same idea, so here is a factory, this is TMF, and TMF has a bunch of CNC machines, about 130. And TMF didn't want to do any sophisticated processing. You don't want very sophisticated things, because then only a few people would be able to do it. So only thing they did was essentially to measure the power input to this machine. And the power, so this is very easy. This is very cheap, $250. You can monitor multiple components. This is essentially for home use. You can buy it and use it to monitor your toaster, your microwave, this and that. And it turns out that you have a factory floor where there are many machines. Some of them have been bought 10 years ago. Some of them more recently. They are doing their parts, different types of things. And what you want to know that which machine is in trouble, which machine is degrading, which machine has a doing part number A versus somebody doing part number C. And how do you sort of do that? I mean, this is a cheap thing. You'd think that this would carry no information whatsoever. $250 for 10 machines, $25 a piece, what can it possibly do? So the basic idea, once again, here is the proposal, is that if every part should have a heartbeat, that it should have a unique signature, because when you're doing machining, part A has a sequence of cuts, and part B has a sequence of cut, part C has a sequence of cut. If you could somehow read those heartbeats, then you don't have to then know or ask an operator that what part you are working on. The machine will tell you itself that what part has been worked on. Moreover, when you process the same part once again, then if you need a little bit more current or less current, it will tell you that whether the thing has degraded. whether the tool has degraded. And over time, you know that when you have to replace the tool head, for example, or the cutting head, for example. All this are hidden in here. So you have a lot of data. We got a lot of data from the manufacturer. And the challenge is, this is how big data looks like, meaning that you can have many of this. And once they have marked it, that certain parts, the greens are the same parts, the blues are the same parts, you look at this data, and you look at it and you try different types of algorithms, and you don't get anything. Because, look, this height is same. What did you get? I mean, if the height is the same, heartbeat doesn't look useful, or there's no fingerprint. So this is really big, but essentially at the same time useless. So you look at it, that is there a fingerprint underneath? It is hours of data, and the fingerprint underneath, if you zoom it up, you begin to see some pattern, still not very coherent, because lots of parts were processed in here, and they look about the same, whether this part or that part, they look about the same, some random bunch coming up and down. But then when you look further in, the heartbeat shows up. This part has this signature, and this has this repeating signature. It is so robust that every one of them actually has the same dip in the same place. Now you may see that there is a wave riding on top of it. It is because the periodicity of making a part, in this case, is not the integer multiple of the sampling period. That's why it's waving up and down. But other than that, this is a completely robust and reproducible signal. You look at the another part, that part also has a distinctive signal that is different from else, which is like a part A, part B, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, what you can find that every part has a signature. And whether you don't need anybody to count parts anymore, you just count the pulses, you know how many parts were measured. And you don't need any new instrument to say. And the operator may write down some wrong things, human error and all, but the machine will not do any error. Every time you see a fingerprint, you know that part has been made. And every time you see the peaks gradually decreasing, you know the machine has been used. Because this one, after 50,000 some other parts, will be machined again, for example. And so this becomes your self-sensing protocol through which your degradations, you can monitor the degradation and the health of the machine. So cheap, $250 for 10, right? And yet, think about how much you could do if you just looked a little carefully. Its probability distributions are also distinctive, and so therefore there's no issue about uniquely identifying them, none whatsoever. So my end point is machines are always talking, but just like a baby, you cannot, only the mom with proper training knows what the meaning of those words are. So our goal here at Purdue would be to see whether we can understand what the machine is talking about. It is constantly telling about itself, and we are finding algorithms, approaches, and techniques by which we can essentially understand them and thereby change how the way manufacturing proceeds by using very simple things at the end of the day. That's all I had. Thank you.
Questions on this part?
I think I like the simplicity with which you presented everything, very complex. I think the key is the frequency at which you sample the data, right? If you miss the frequency, you miss everything, right? You could get a completely wrong signature. So that, in my opinion, that knowledge comes from understanding the process itself, right? That's where I think goes back to your talk as well, that this hasn't been realized in the industry mainly because people are just looking at data as pure data rather than bringing the physics and the knowledge into it. So just a comment, yeah.
Just one comment I would make, although, first of all, your point is absolutely right, that you have to know what to sample, what frequencies to sample at. But one thing I also wanted to highlight is that because you are doing, let's say, 100 parts, Although you're subsampling in each one of them, so you don't get the exact shape, but because you did 100 of them, you can collapse them together and can get extreme high precision fingerprinting by using low precision sampling. So therefore, you are catching periodically the shape, but it's like the elephant story, right? Somebody sees the ear, somebody sees the trunk, but eventually you can construct the elephant by partial information. So because it is doing many gives you the enhanced fidelity that you wouldn't have otherwise, right? That's the key.
In the interest of time, because we are at the poster session time, there will be a post. Oh, you have a question, maybe.
I think that a true achievement is gaining the trust of the manufacturers. And how did you do that? Anything you can say about that? Was it Purdue name? Was it incentives, state incentives?
Like anything, trust takes time. We worked with them for 5 years, and with student projects, they have now so much trust. I guess Ted can tell you how much it takes. But really, at the end, we are dependent on them, and they realize through us, we can do things that they could not do themselves.
I mean, also, this is sort of not fundamental to their processing. This doesn't tell exactly what part they are doing, how they are doing. So because this is like the compressor data, it is in some way technology agnostic, but at the same time is a high-level data, high-level problem that's shared by many. So they know that by improving the compressors, yes, they will improve benefit, but everybody else will benefit. There's no harm in that. So I think being able to sort of find a problem that sort of floats a little bit up from their sensitive information is the right way to gain trust, because once you solve their problem, then they'll trust you a little bit more to do something useful. Why would they give you sensitive information if you cannot show that even on the simpler things, you cannot do anything useful?
Well, with your research, you can look at loss prevention.
Yes,
yes, and that has become sensitive.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. What we have at the next session is you see very quickly in 1 hour, 34 posters. Students have most of them 1 minute, a few of them selected by industry have 2 minutes. So I will ask them to please line up, and I open the presentation, and let's